Now is the chair of Homeland Security in the Senate, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who was with President Trump last night. Welcome back to Meet the Press, Senator.
Good morning, Andrea.
Well, good to be with you. I want to ask you first about the speech last night. The president referred to FBI officials as scum. Is that the right way for the president of the United States to speak about law enforcement officers of the U.S. government?
Well, first of all, I completely understand the president's frustration. He knew from day one that he was innocent, and he was subjected to this 2-year investigation, a very thorough investigation. And in that process, certainly Andrew McCabe was fired because he lied to his own investigators. Now, this is the former deputy director and acting FBI director lying to his own investigators. So, no, I understand the president's frustration. From my standpoint, there has been a concerted effort since the day after the election to sabotage this administration. So I completely understand his frustration.
And do you agree that he should use words like scum to describe law enforcement officers?
Probably I would use different words, but I've certainly questioned the possibility. And now I think the proven fact there was definitely corruption at the highest levels of the FBI. And that's one thing Senator Graham, Senator Grassley, and myself are going to try and uncover now that the Mueller investigation is over.
Well, the Mueller investigation reported hundreds of contacts with Russian officials, no evidence that could be prosecuted, but partly because there were emails that were erased, there were people who were not available, there were people they couldn't interview or refused to be interviewed, they couldn't get to interview the president himself. But are you comfortable with all of the contacts between this campaign and the Russian officials?
Yes, I am, because I read the report. It's painstakingly detailed. And, you know, time and time again, Special Counsel Mueller said there was no evidence of collusion. And there was none. And again, we have enormous challenges facing this nation. The crisis at the border, and this has been a huge distraction for the American public as well as this administration as it tries to tackle these tough problems.
He didn't say, sir, that there was no evidence of collusion, because that's not a legal term. He said that he could not prove conspiracy. But the president's own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said that he thinks it's okay for Republican campaign members, for Republican candidates to welcome support from a foreign adversary, from Russia. Do you feel the same way? Would you welcome support from Russia in your campaign?
No, and I don't believe the Trump campaign did. So again, from my standpoint, this issue is over in terms of collusion. Now, I was one of the people briefed by the Obama administration when we were told about Russian interference. That was back in September 2016. And the whole point of that briefing in a secure situation was, we have this covered. We want you to go out as members of Congress and say that the election results would be legitimate. That's what they want us to say. But then the wrong person got elected, and all of a sudden we have this whole Russian collusion story. And it has been a big hoax. It's been a witch hunt, and I understand the president's frustration.
Well, Mitt Romney, one of your fellow Republican senators, said, "I am sickened at the extent and pervasiveness of dishonesty and misdirection by individuals in the highest office of the land, including the president. I am also appalled that fellow citizens working in a campaign for president welcomed help from Russia, including information that had been illegally obtained, that none of them acted to inform American law enforcement." That was after his read of the Mueller report. Why haven't you and other Republican senators reacted as he reacted to the Mueller report, especially on obstruction?
Maybe it's because I understand the president's frustration at being subjected to a witch hunt for 2 years. You know, I was in that rally yesterday. It was a venue filled, a record crowd full of energized people who love this country and who, quite honestly, their support for President Trump is actually growing. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the economy grow by 3.2%. I'm seeing business investment averaging over the last 9 quarters at over 6%, when the last 2 years of President Obama was 0.6%. 10 times greater business investment. That's going to drive our economy for years to come. So again, I'm looking at the results of this administration, and I also think about what we could have accomplished had this witch hunt not been occurring for the last 2 years. I understand the president's frustration, and I also understand the president's supporters' frustration of the media just continuing this witch hunt. It's ridiculous.
Well, you're calling it a witch hunt. Let me play something that Chris Wray said just the other day, the FBI director, about Russian attempts to interfere with the elections.
I do think that Russia poses a very significant counterintelligence threat, certainly in the cyber arena. That is not just an election cycle threat. It's pretty much a 365 days a year threat, and that has absolutely continued.
Why haven't we heard that from the president? Why does the president stand next to Vladimir Putin in Helsinki and say he believes Putin over his own intelligence officials about the Russian attacks on our democracy?
Listen, Andrea, I am every bit as concerned about Russian interference as any Democrat senator. I'm chairman of the European Subcommittee. I've seen the attempted coup in Montenegro. So it didn't surprise me at all that they were interfering in our election through social media as the primary cause. That's hard to really police. But in terms of changing vote totals, almost impossible because we have local control of elections. What is certainly at risk is voter files, but DHS has done a pretty good job at consulting with state and local jurisdictions to try and prevent that from happening as well. So let's not blow this thing out of proportion. Let's be vigilant, let's be concerned about it, but let's not blow it out of proportion either.
According to the New York Times, Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, made it clear to Kirstjen Nielsen that Mr. Trump still equated any public discussion of malign Russian election activity with questions about the legitimacy of his victory. Ms. Nielsen eventually gave up on her effort to organize a White House meeting of cabinet secretaries to coordinate a strategy to protect next year's elections. If the president considers this a top priority, why hasn't he ordered a government-wide, cabinet-level investigation and attack to defend America from Russian interference?
Because DHS has been on the case. They are on the case under the Obama administration, and that's just continued on into the Trump administration. Again, they've had incredibly high levels of contact with state and local jurisdictions, certifying individuals to get classified information. They've been consulting with local jurisdictions in terms of protecting their voter files. So DHS has been on the case. They've done a pretty successful job. We didn't see that kind of interference in 2018, and I think we can rest pretty assured that 2020 will be successful as well.
Doesn't it have to go beyond DHS? Doesn't it have to be all of the cabinet departments working on this?
Well, DHS has the primary responsibility, and they've done a pretty good job under Chris Krebs.
Thank you very much, Senator Johnson. Thanks again for being with us today.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.